Hi everybody, my name is Jens Larsen. In this video I want to talk about the situation you're in if you're at a jam session or on a gig and you get handed a lead sheet for a jazz standard. So how do you approach that? What do you need to think about? And what do you need to be aware of? How do you try to sort of sum it up and understand it before you start playing it? So really I'm going to base this mostly on the things that I'm thinking about, just to illustrate that. Of course that's the best thing I can do with it. This video is probably going to be a bit long, but it's really for the biggest part going to be about the stuff that I'm thinking about the 10 seconds before we play the song, really, when I'm just looking at the sheet music and trying to quickly understand what's going on with this piece of music. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar, about improvising over chord changes and understanding chord progressions and using arpeggios, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to make sure not to miss anything, then click the little bell notification icon next to the subscribe button. The song that I'm using in this video is actually a song that I already know. So of course in the hypothetical situation you don't know the song, but I thought it was better just to take a song that I actually know has enough information in it and where you will actually get some useful ideas and some useful tips, rather than a song where I don't know if half of the stuff that I use will actually apply or if it's a good example for some of the things that I'm going to talk about. So that's why I took I Remember You. The first thing you want to really figure out when you look at a song is the form, because most jazz standards, the way we play them, where we only play the chorus, we don't play the verse, they have a repeating form. It's very often 32 bars. It's not always 32 bars, which of course I Remember You isn't. And they will have basically one of two structures. They will be what you could call an ABAC, so it's basically like 2 times 16s, and it has sort of a half of the song, or it will be an AABA, where it has one sort of main structure and then it'll have a bridge part that's different. Those are sort of the basic parts that forms that you'll come across, and you want to be aware, and definitely you want to be conscious of that when you look at a piece of music. What is the form? Because it's going to tell you so much about what you're going to hear and what to expect, and also when you understand the form, as you'll see, I'll talk about that when I start looking at the chords. There are certain things that just always reappear in certain forms, and that's important to be aware of those, because it's going to make your life a lot easier. Really what this is about, of course I use a lot of theory, and that's just because theory is there to help me understand and actually also to help me hear things when I have to play them if I haven't played them before, because the way I use theory is a description of what I hear. And I think that's one of the sort of upsides to using functional harmony and classical theory, that it does that quite well. And then the other thing is, of course, it just has to be practical. So it's also just about putting that knowledge to use, and then hopefully through this video you can see how I apply it and what I get out of it, and sort of the advantages you get out of that. So the form is definitely something that we always forget to look at, but it's so important, and it's gonna make everything a lot easier. It's the practical thing to do, really. Let's look at the form, the way it's printed out here. So I Remember You, as you can tell from the sheet music, it's repeating after 8 bars, so that there's a repeat sign there, and there are 2 different endings, and that tells you actually already that it's an AABA form. In a lot of real books they actually write out if something what the form is also, but in this case you can kind of tell from that it's an AABA form. And what's special about I Remember You is, so it has it's in the key of F major. You can see that at the end of the piece because it ends on an F chord and an F note in the melody. And the A parts are clearly in F, but there's quite a lot of different things happening. And it has the A part, and then there's a bridge, and the bridge is also just going to the 4th degree, which is also a fairly common thing to have happen in a jazz standard. And then it does a lot of other stuff, that's modulations, which I'll return to when I start really looking at the chord progression. And then we get the last A, and the last A is longer, so it has a tag. So really the last A is just like the first, the first and the second A, but instead of ending after 8 bars, they've added another 4 bars, so the last A is 12 bars long. And that's sort of the basic form that you want to look at. So if we just look at how that works, so that makes it easier, because if you're playing a song for the first time and you realize that it's ABA, then you do know when you played 8 bars that you're going to get something that you already played, and it's something that you're going to recognize, and something that you can, and therefore it's going to get easier. because basically what you want to use your theory and all your knowledge, and also all that is that all the other things that you try to figure out with the form is that you want to be able to predict how the song sounds before you have to play it, so that it becomes familiar and easy to understand and not surprising. You don't want to have stuff where if you play it, you're sort of playing it and then going, I hope it sounds nice, because I don't know, then that's not a good situation to be in. Of course, you need to be able to understand what's going on, and that's going to tell you, well, if I play this, then there's at least a 99% chance, because of course, or a 95 or whatever, I don't know what percentage, but because it's still going to be interpreted by other people, so maybe somebody else is playing some other changes, or somebody's changing the melody or something. And of course you have that kind of factor in there as well, but in general, if you have just a solid understanding of the song, you can sort of play something that's fairly safe and logical, and you can focus on playing music with that rather than just looking at the chords and then going, oh, it says B minor 7, I have to play a B minor 7, I wonder what it sounds like. And that's really the goal of being able to read a piece of music like this. And of course it takes interpretation, because it's not a written out guitar part, so you need to sort of make your own part on the fly, and it has to fit with what is happening around you. So much for the form. The way the form reduces it, of course, is just that we have now reduced it to an A part that's 8 bars with 2 different endings, and then a bridge that's also 8 bars, and then the last A is an A part with a tag of an extra 4 bars, which actually means that we need to know 6 bars. If you look at the sheet music the way it is now, and I hope I can edit that right, because I just took the way I printed it out of a real book that I have, and there are a lot of changes in this song that I don't agree with, and I'll get to that along the way also. And then some of them I'm just going to change, and I'm not going to play them because they mostly will be changed. If you're playing with people who are actually playing this song regularly, then they won't play the changes that are in this book, because they don't actually sound that nice with the melody. Hopefully, at least. That's the most of the time the case. The whole political thing about getting a piece of sheet music for a song that you don't really know, I mean, in some cases I will say, well, that sounds weird, or, well, yeah, actually it does sound weird, because I don't have an idea about what it sounds like. So I'll just go, well, that's really this type of chord, and I would expect it to be played like this, and it says that, and then I would ask about changing it, maybe. But it really depends on the situation, because if you don't know people that well, you just play what's there and listen. And also sometimes you're playing with people that don't want to change whatever it is that they're used to playing, which is fine too. Then you just make what you can of it. Because when you're playing, if you're sight reading a piece of music, you're probably not the leader. At least if you're the leader and you're sight reading a piece of music, then you're probably doing something wrong. So that means that you probably don't have to play the melody, of course, unless you get called by a bass player or a drummer. But you probably don't need to play the melody, and you probably need to accompany somebody who does play the melody. And that will sort of be the situation mostly. And that means that the first thing you need to be able to do is actually just to comp the melody in a way that makes sense, and then later also comp solos in a way that makes sense. So that's important to keep in mind also when you try to approach it, and also when we start talking about what you kind of need to be able to do with a song. To give you an idea about what the song actually sounds like, I'm just going to play through it once with the melody, so you have an idea about what we're talking about. That's going to help also understanding the analysis of the chord progression, and it's also likely if you're playing a jazz standard or a jazz original that's not like hyper modern, then you probably heard it before, and you have an idea about what it sounds like. So that's going to be information that you would most likely anyway have in the back of your mind. So that's the song, and I mean maybe it's a bit fast forward actually. what you can tell here is, of course, there's a lot of stuff happening that is not, or I don't know if you can tell, but I'm playing some chords that are not as written on the sheet music, because there are a few things that I'm changing. So I guess in analyzing this song, now that we've kind of sussed out that we have an A part and a B part, and that's the main focus, and then we need to just figure out the tag. That's the kind of thing that you just need to be aware of. That's important because that means that we don't have to analyze that much material, and we don't need to understand that much material, because a lot of stuff is already repeating within the song, and you want to be aware of that because you don't want to think too much about it. So it starts on the root, and then we get, so in the second bar we get this progression. It's written out like this, really, which I don't think you play it like that. It's written out like that quite often, but I think it's kind of rare to actually play this as a B minor E7. I think most of the time you will play B half diminished. Well, we can do that like this, and then resolve that to the F major. And the reason for that is that, of course, what's really there in the song here is a sharp 4 diminished. So basically that would be this type of sound, so a B diminished with an E in the melody, and then back to F. Then we get a cadence to the 4th degree, and in the tempo that I just played, and that you will probably reduce that just to being F7, but you just need to be aware of, oh yeah, it's a cadence to the 4th degree, which is, I mean, they're very common in songs, obviously. And then 4 minor following the 4th degree, again something that's extremely common, even though here it's kind of used as the cadence to go back to the tonic, which is, I think, a little bit less common. And then we get a 3, 6, 2, 5. So to take us back to the 1. One thing that's really nice to realize with this is that if you have an AABA form and the first chord in the song is the root, then you're probably like going to be 90% sure that some sort of turnaround is going to take up the last 2 bars. And that means that that's something you already know. I take it you know your turnarounds in all keys, or at least that's something you want to know in the long run. And that's going to make it easier to just sort of throw that out the window, because you already know what's going to be there and you don't have to worry about it. Really, it's just a turnaround. And that means that you have less information that you have to take care of. This is also why it's important to take all the different progressions and try and just sum them up, because in that way it's easier to remember pieces. You can just reduce them to bigger blocks that you've sort of put together, and they're jazz standards, and there's a certain group of songs because they're similar. So whatever you can sort of suss out like that is going to be very useful. For instance, with the sharp 4 diminished in the second bar, that's also quite a common place to have a sharp 4 diminished. It's in other songs, so now I have to, of course, on the spot remember which ones. It's kind of in what's that called? That's called Embraceable You. It's in that, but that goes to the 2nd degree. It's also in You Do Something to Me. That's exactly the same. There's one more where it's in also, and it's like really in that spot, and also resolving back to the 1. So that is something that happens more often. If you know one song that does this and you see another one that does it, then that makes life easier, because then you're like, oh yeah, that's just like that, and you have an idea about what it sounds. This is where it's important that you can analyze your chord progressions and that you can also generalize them, so that you can make those kind of comparisons, because it may be that in the other song where this happens, it does it like this, and then you wouldn't realize that it's the same progression. But if you do know that it's kind of the same progression, that's going to make life easier. That's why it's important to just group stuff together in different chords and recognize what stuff is the same. And really just because it kind of sounds the same. This is the basic idea with the music theory here, is that it's there to describe what it sounds like. And that's why we make the groups of different chords that might be different chords, but they still kind of sound the same, because they act in the same way and they have the same notes doing the same kind of thing within them. Like in the sharp 4 diminished, this is the essence of what is going on. It's just the G sharp wants to go to A back on and the B wants to go to the C. That's really what that chord is about. And that's what that whole cadence is then also about, or if it was an A flat diminished or a B diminished. So that's important to think about. So the more standards you know and the more standards you can analyze, the easier life is going to be, of course. Then see, so we had that in the cadence to the 4th degree, there's nothing really 4 minor, then there's D625. The second time it just goes to the 1 chord, and then it needs to go to the bridge, so we get a cadence to the bridge, and the first thing the bridge does is to go to the 4th degree. So logically, the last part of the second A is just a cadence to the bridge. And then in the bridge, I guess because there's a lot happening in this piece already, so there are a lot of different chords and a lot of different sounds. So if you really want to go somewhere else, you cannot just sort of mess around with 4 and 4 minor, because that's already in the A parts. And that's just my personal suggestion on how the song is constructed anyway. But so it goes to B flat, and then from B flat, if we look at that as a modulation, then it goes to the median of that one, and that's then D major. So we just get a cadence to D major, and that repeats. Then we get, so now it's in D major, and then it just wants to resolve to, or not resolve, modulate to C major. Does that by turning the major chord into a minor chord, similar to How High the Moon, or April, it's not Afternoon in Paris, not April in Paris, or Solar. There are a lot of songs that does this. So, and then we're on C, and C is of course the key of the dominant of what we're in. So we're in F, and the key of the dominant would then be C major, and then that's used to just give us a cadence back to F, and then we're on the last A. So if we look at the last A is a little bit different from the first A, and it has to do with the melody. So it starts the same, of course, sharp 4 thing, and then normally here we would have a cadence to B flat, but actually it's a cadence to G minor, and really that's just because otherwise you get like this, because the melody is on the root. So we go to G minor because it just sounds a little bit better with the melody, and then again the 4 minor, and then in the sheet music here it says A minor with A in the melody, and this is actually like the harmonization that's written out here is quite common for a lot of standards that tag the last A, but it's not what I would play here. I don't think it's played here very often like that, because it also doesn't fit the melody that well. So I would go back to the 1, so F major 7, and then in the last bar of that line, instead of having a D7 with A, G and F, that doesn't fit at all. Then I would take B half diminished, so, and then a B flat minor 6, which is a 4 minor, and then go to a 3-6-2-5 kind of thing, so A minor, C, D minor, and then a G minor 7, and then a C7. That progression probably works a little bit better, and then of course just a turnaround to get us back to the top of the form. As I mentioned, you probably don't have to play the theme in a situation where you get a piece of music like this, because somebody else is saying I want to play this and giving you the sheet. But at the same time, what does need to happen is that you probably have to play chords behind the one playing the theme, and that means that you want to be aware of what the melody is in the chord. And the only way you can do that if you get a lead sheet is really just to be able to read the melody in a very practical sense. Just to talk a little bit about that, I guess this is all about understanding the fact that if the song is in F, then choose something that's sort of a middle ground in F, hopefully something that's, in terms of range, is going to make sense. And anyway, if you're reading a jazz standard, you're reading it, it's written out in concert pitch, which means that we have to play it an octave up. So it does, for guitar this says, but actually you need to play it that's something to be aware of, also because then you kind of have an idea about where the melody probably will be. and what you can then add to the chord. The thing you really need to think about with this is, of course, that you don't play chords that clash with the melody. So that's really important, that you realize that, what's a good example? Actually, the second bar is already a really good example. So we're starting out with the F major 7. Well, that's all pretty safe because it's all moving and you're not going to have any long notes that can really clash, I think. But then you get to the B half diminished E7, and since it's a B half diminished E7, it is likely that you want to do this, but maybe that's not such a great idea if the melody is this, so then you want to put it down here somewhere. So in this case there's an 11 in the melody, and that means that you don't want to put an F right next to it. At least only for sort of effect, and but yeah, that might not go down too well if you do that, and that happens all the time. If we take the cadence to the 4th degree, then there could also be. I would probably say be careful, because the 3rd is really on the 1. Be careful with the 9 low. Of course, if the melody is being played like here, you can actually have the 9 above it though still, because then you have this interval happening and not this interval, and you also don't want to have this interval, which is just the different versions of the D and the E flat. So if the D is the highest, then it's okay. If they're next to each other, then that's probably not so nice, and if the D is under the E flat, then that really has to be on purpose. Let's see, so we have that, then we go to the, so that's the thing, like you want to be able to play it. In general, when you get a standard, it can be useful just to be able to play them. It's difficult. If I have to read this, I would not read it, even on a gig, I would read it with some sort of interpretation, because if you really play it like, that's really boring. So there's no need to really do that, and then you will still try and come up with some sort of phrasing on it, hopefully. But at the same time, you do want to be able to read through it and understand, have an idea about what the notes are. Especially you want to recognize immediately what the notes are compared to the chord that's under them, so that you can play chords that will actually fit it. And that might sound really complicated, but actually most of the time there's also like a jazz thing, a jazz standard thing, maybe also just a jazz thing. We kind of have the same notes in the melody all the time. So reading like we need our minor 11 chords, and we need our major chords with the 3rd in the melody, and that's just because those are the notes that are in the melody all the time, and you will run into them, but most of it you already have covered. You just need to realize that what you're doing, that works. That's really what you need to be able to do with the melody, and in terms of just understanding it and actually reading it, and also looking at what is it against each of the chords. That's also going to make life easier if you were to read this, if you do get to have to read this on a gig, because then you can, that's what's going to make it possible for you to harmonize it on the spot, so that you can go. Just to try and see if I can demonstrate in another place where I would normally play it. So that's possible as well. You can tell when I do that, it's a side note, but if I have to do that with a song that I don't know, I focus on the melody and then I'll add a chord when I can. Because the important thing is I'm playing the melody, and if I can add chords, it's nice. If I don't add any chords, it's not a disaster. Even if you're just playing with a bass player, then that's fine. You know, that as long as you have the bass note and the melody note, everything is cool. And then you don't have to really worry about putting voicings on everything. And then you just add a voicing whenever you can. And of course, that depends on how used you are to doing that. It's a good thing to be able to do, actually, to sort of side read and harmonize. Mostly just because you really get used to. This is again just about thinking in terms of generalizing the information, and if you learn a lot of songs, that tells you then you can start sort of figuring out like, okay, I really need a lot of major chords, major 7 chords with the thirds in the melody, or whenever there's a sharp 4 diminished happening, then it's with the 7th of the scale in the melody. Stuff like that is, because that's just stuff that's kind of common, but you would only really figure it out if you play a lot of standards. And knowing that, and it's also just like, you wouldn't be able to use that information unless you really know all the songs, where you can just take this and then go, well, that's the same as this song, and then you know what it sounds like. That's for a big part is how I work with stuff like this. And then at some point it becomes more a general thing where you just know what it sounds like in the key. But most of the time you just reference the songs you already know. That's easier. Probably what you have to do is you have to comp on the song. So that's maybe something we can just go through. Of course it's going to be very sort of taste related. So the way I would come through this is just my taste. And there are a million ways of doing it. It depends on kind of what kind of style and what kind of music you play. For me, I would just try with a song like this, because it's a, how can you say that, it's a song with a lot of harmony. So that's kind of what I immediately would be drawn to with it, more than maybe a groove. It's not like a... where that would maybe be a song that's more about the groove somehow. Where if we're just doing... that would be the kind of thing I might do. That to me, this is fairly neutral, I guess. I mean, there's only one way. I do a lot of stuff with sort of movement within the chord. Of course, you can also just go through it and then play. And it's really about what is comfortable for you and what you're used to doing. Because when you're playing through it, you need to play something that fits with what is going on around you and what is going on with the melody, which is of course a part of what is going on around you. And for the rest, it's really up to you. So you can also, it would be just fine to go. Yeah, actually now I start to go back to what I had in the beginning. But you get the idea. You can play more sort of standard drop 2 voicings and more just complete chords moving around. That's all good. That's about just comping through it and getting used to comping different songs. And again, I think really if you're used to playing, so if you're used to playing a sharp 4 diminished like this, so I mean, in fact, the sharp 4 diminished, the way it's harmonized here, it's a cadence in A minor, and you can play it like that because if you play an A minor voicing, then that will still sound like an F major 7. So those are the voicings you'll be using. Of course, you kind of have to hear that it's not in A minor when you're playing it, but the chords will be the same. So yeah, the only thing you have to watch out with, and that's difficult when I don't have the melody happening at the same time, is that sometimes I'll be playing stuff where the melody is really active. Just lay down a chord, I think, just to be safe. You can play more sometimes, but it's not always going to fit, and you're better off just being cautious. And in that way, it's almost as if when you're comping the melody that you're also playing the melody, that you have an idea about. So the chords are kind of coming in between the melody. I think that's the way you want to approach stuff like that. And actually you want to do the same in the solos. I can't, of course, do that with a solo, but when you're playing behind a soloist, try to sort of fill in when he's not, or he or she is not playing a lot. And for the rest, you might want to lay down the harmony. You might need to do that, and you might not need to do it. But then it's just supporting what is happening, and then you can be more active when they're not doing something. And then, then we can get into a huge discussion on different comping situations. But that's sort of the main rules you want to think about, is that you want to play when the soloist is not playing as much. And it's certainly not going to kill anybody if you even reduce the harmony and just play fewer chords and then just only play on the one, really. You can really play very little and then still play something that sounds, it's good. That actually sounds that sounds nice and works. And of course, we have to not lose sight of the fact that if you're playing behind somebody, you're playing there to support them. So you need to listen to what they're doing and see if you can find something that fits. That's sort of the main idea with this. But finally, of course, you also have to be able to solo on the song. And again, if you know all the stuff that I already talked about, if you're able to analyze the song and you have an idea about what are the important notes, because analyzing the song and reducing, just to sort of come back to that, if I'm reducing the second bar to a sharp 4 diminished, then I know that the point of that whole bar is that we can go or, and that really tells me a lot about what I need to play on it also. So not only do I have other chords, and of course you can also think of it as being like a complete 2/5, but even in a medium tempo, if you don't know the song, it's nicer just to reduce it to something else and then think in terms of the functions, because then you kind of have the function to play off, and that just means, in this case, that the way you would solo on it, the function is just going to say, well, I need to play from that note to that note, and I need to emphasize that note on this chord, and then it needs to resolve to that note on this chord. To have that kind of thinking in there, and that's just going to make it easier, and you can a little bit ignore all the different times of 2/5s and stuff like that. So in that way you would reduce an A part to being F, B diminished, F, F7, B flat minor, and then the turnaround, which you can the turnaround you can also just reduce to being F and then C7, really. In that way there's like less information. Of course, I don't only think other chords, because that gets complicated, but if you're anyway used to thinking of certain harmonic movements like a 2/5 to the 4th degree or the 4 minor as sort of one thing, as a concept in itself rather than individual chords, then that makes it a little bit easier to solo on. And then, I mean, all you need to do is just play like a solo that you can get through, and that sounds nice. And then you don't have to be completely flashy or change the whole thing. Of course, you can even with a solo like this, you can start reharmonizing. That's not a big no-no in any way. So you can start changing the chords around. Again, this is something I also do coming out of the functions, really. But then you do need to kind of be aware of the chords that are there in the first place. But then the chord progressions are going to tell you something about what you can get away with. So if I have to play a solo on this, let's just try that and then see if that gives us anything to talk about with it, or if it's just a huge disaster. Then that would be something like. So that will be 2 chords of solo on it. I think I'm not really doing anything that's like really out there in any way. I did once, like, of course, the natural thing that we hear for the second bar is to have it as a B half diminished to E7 flat 9, and then I think there was one place in the second chorus I started to play this like a B minor 7 E7, and then you can start using that as an interesting thing to throw in there, because that's further away from the key. It's gonna sound more surprising if you have the other option. But I've talked a lot about different kinds of reharmonizations in other videos, so there's not really a lot that's happening with that. For the rest, it's really like thinking in terms of sort of a reduced version of the progression. The way, as I just said before I played, like I'm reducing it to functions, and I'm not really reducing it just to one chord. You can also do that. That's one way of thinking about it. So that you say, well, it's a 2-5, I'll just think about the dominant. The problem you have with that sometimes is that sometimes in a progression, the dominant is not going to be the most important chord. Because if you have the 3, 6, 2, 5, then the important chord in the first bar is not going to be, it's not the D7, it's the A minor. Because that's the tonic chord, that's the one, that's like all the other chords are pointing towards that. So if you play a D7 instead of the A minor, and also this is going to be a D7 from harmonic minor, from G harmonic minor, that's going to be odd. So you do need to have an idea about which chords can you leave out and which chords can you leave out. But that is sort of the general idea that you can work with that for soloing, that you can try and reduce it, and that's why I reduce it to functions essentially, because that means that I'm understanding a little bit more than just leaving out certain chords in a 2-5. If you make rules like that, they're never going to be, so depending on context, and then they're always going to not do you a lot of good in a key or in certain places. Which is the same for theory that's like chord scale theory, where the idea is, chord scale theory, the way I understand it at least, and the way I've come across it when people taught it to me, is just to have, well, it's this kind of chord, and therefore you play that kind of scale. And that's just not true. And it's also not, it's not very flexible, because a minor chord is not always just a minor chord. There are so many different kinds of minor chords, and you want to choose the right one for the context that you're playing it in, and the key and the place in the piece and stuff like that. And that's not, but that's also not the point of chord scale theory. Chord scale theory is just there to give you a way to interpret any chord symbol and then come up with something, and then it might not be, it's going to be in the ballpark, but it's not going to be completely right. If you play Dorian on all minor 7s or something like that, then that's how that works. But that's also, if you don't take the rest of the song into consideration, then I think anybody can realize that then you're losing information that you might need. And that's what's happening with stuff like that. So that's pretty much how I would work on understanding and approaching a piece that I'm side reading. And actually this goes for if I'm just practicing a piece as well, that I'm trying to learn it like this. But I didn't include really how I would work on the different things. But really, there's just like being able to play the melody different places and harmonize it and stuff like that. That's a very big part of just knowing this. You can probably also tell when I'm soloing and when I'm comping that I'm really hearing the melody all the time, and that's what I'm sort of playing off, because I find that easier to hear than changes even if they're functions or not, then it's easier to hear them sort of coming out of the melody. So that's what I'm still sort of referencing when I'm playing. Yeah, so that's at least an attempt at what I would do and how I think about a standard that I have to read. So I'm curious what you guys think. If there's something, if you have a trick that you're using a lot, or something that I didn't talk about, then leave a comment on the video, because this is a little bit an open-ended discussion, obviously. Maybe I'll make another video if I change my mind around how I do this, but this is actually how I do it, and this is, of course, this is pretty much how it works, I think. But at the same time, there might be things that I didn't think about or didn't talk about also. I know there are a few things I didn't talk about. So if there's something that you think, well, you should have mentioned this as well, then leave a comment on the video. I do really appreciate your guys' feedback, because that makes the video better, all the videos that I make, and I make a lot of them. So any feedback you have is, of course, welcome. If you want to check out more stuff on jazz guitar and it's the first time that you see one of my videos, then you can, of course, subscribe to my channel. As I just said, I make a lot of videos and I've been doing it for quite some time. So there's already a lot of stuff available on my channel for you to check out if you're into discovering and developing more stuff for yourself on jazz guitar. Then I also want to mention the people who support me over on Patreon. I have a Patreon page and I have a small community of people who are supporting me and helping me making all these videos and supporting me financially, so I have the time to make the videos, in fact. And I'm very grateful for their help in that. And if you want to help me, then check out my Patreon page. There's a link in the description. For the rest, there's a new lesson on Thursday, and thank you for watching.